Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 161, Meno, Final Conclusions. It's time to work out what the characters are deigmata of. In other words, what are the paradeigmata? If Gorgias had been one of a kind, I would have suggested, as usual, that he is of the paradigm sophist. But Meno is also a deigma of the same paradeigma. They both have to do with memory. They deal in anamnesis of the worst sort, remembering doxai, opinions, without attempting to combine them into any significant conclusion. The idea above the paradigm would appear to be mneme, memory, or anamnesis, recollection. And the paradigm, the dramatization of this idea, has to be a minimalist character, which we should call the mnemeuon, the one who recalls or recollects. This isn't to say that the other characters don't recollect, far from it. They all recollect, but they have on top of recollection other qualities. This is why we should look at Anytus and the aristocrat in the poem cited from Theognis. These two characters are deigmata of a paradeigma who is experienced, the emperon, which would be a minimalist dramatization of empiria, experience. Anytus looks down on sophists, and we may understand that he does so because he knows that they lack experience. They talk about things with no experience. It is because he has experience that Anytus can give good advice. Also, the aristocrat in Theognis is portrayed as someone who would do that for someone asking for advice, and it would be sensible to ask for advice from such an aristocrat. We come next to the Thessalian horsemen, and these are technitai, and obviously the paradigm will be the technites, the craftsman. And the idea being dramatized here is techne, craft or skill. Techne incorporates mneme and empiria, memory and experience. But in addition to this, it adds a method which allows the technites, the craftsman, to perform a series of steps which leads to a result, a consistent result. The technites doesn't know why these steps work, but they do. Unlike the politician who can only give separate pieces of advice, the craftsman can teach his children, for example, a complete course of action which, if followed, leads to the predictable outcome. Finally, we have Socrates, and we've seen in other dialogues that he can be conceived as the deigma of the paradeigma dialectician, but here we have another person as well, Meno's slave, who is clearly puzzled by the geometrical problem, which seems to indicate that he is also dialectical in nature. As Socrates says to Meno, if his slave repeats the exercise over and over again, he may eventually understand. In other words, he may eventually acquire the episteme regarding that particular geometrical problem. Therefore, the paradigm this time is not the dialectician, but someone who understands, or because of the slave, I would say someone who may begin to understand. And after all, understanding is a never-ending process. All the time you have to think and compare and contrast doxai until eventually they all become a consistent matrix of opinions by which one of the doxai becomes a conclusion which may be backed up by the other doxai. Thus, eventually, the slave would be able not only to demonstrate where the new square should be constructed, but he would be able to explain why. He would be able to use any of the steps during the exercise as stages in the explanation. Thus we have two deigmata of the paradeigma, the epistemon, the one with episteme, or the one who is capable of acquiring episteme, and obviously the paradeigma is the minimalist dramatization of episteme itself. The dialogue goes out of its way to portray the people who recall, the people with experience, and the people with techne as people who understand. And not only that, they are considered good, while the people who do understand, or rather the one person who does understand, Socrates, and the other person who might eventually understand, the slave, are considered bad because they are powerless and poor. These then are dramatizations of the fact that techne, empiria, and mneme, or anamnesis, are all considered to be episteme, which they are not, while episteme is not identified as such by the many, the people who lack episteme. We may thus conclude that the dialogue altogether is about episteme, what it actually is, and how it appears not to be. This requires essentially two paradigms. One paradigm would be a concrete minimalist representation of episteme, and the other paradigm would be a concrete minimalist representation of the not episteme, which appears to be episteme. This paradigm, however, is divided into three. These are the three possible aspects of that paradigm. Techne, empiria, and mneme, or anamnesis, are all types of things which are confused by the many with episteme. The many who lack understanding consider the three apparently understanding types as good, while the really understanding type they consider to be bad. And this is dramatized in the dialogue. We should be able to work out why the many would think like they do from what happens in the dialogue. To help us out, Plato shows what happens when each type teaches its type. When memory alone teaches someone memory, the result is a simple collection of opinions with no connection between them and no ability to hold a consistent position. Experience on its own cannot teach experience. It can teach from experience, but what can it teach? Simple pieces of advice. And this advice is geared to acquiring power and wealth in the polis, which, as we saw in HIppias Minor, is simply acquiring the means, whether for good or for bad. Techne, or craft, is a little more positive, let's say, but it is still limited to a particular field. such as breeding horses. Socrates also has a techne. He has the techne dialecticae, which is the art of conversing with a view to discovering the truth and understanding the reason why, which you don't get from techne on its own. Techne normally tells you what to do in order to achieve a result. Dialectic teaches one to understand things beyond itself, beyond the techne. The point of the techne is basically to release the nous, the intellect, to begin to ask questions and look for answers. Episteme uses anamnesis, recollection, not simply to collect opinions, but with the aid of experience, it compares and contrasts previous parts of the conversation in order to reach conclusions. It also uses method, just as any techne does. Thus, the dialogue is about episteme as it is and as it appears, but the appearance is not opinion. Doxa is not opposed to episteme. That's the job of techne, empiria, and mneme, or anamnesis. All four mental operations involve doxai. Only mneme could entertain the wrong opinion that there is right opinion. There is no such thing as right opinion before the opinion has been adjudged by episteme. Right opinion does not lead anyone to Larissa or anywhere else they might want to go, because if you do actually arrive at Larissa, you no longer have a simple opinion, but a chain of opinions based on your travels from one place to another. You have experience, you have the method, stages you've gone through, and at the end you also have understanding. To summarize, the dialogue is about episteme, understanding, how it is and how it appears to the many, and of course to any dialectical reader. We can see that Socrates has episteme. Other people, the many, cannot see that he has episteme. They assume that people with memory or experience or a craft, they have episteme. Thus the appearance of episteme is techne, empiria, or mneme, or anamnesis, and Aristotle develops all of these ideas undramatically in the very beginning of what is known today as metaphysics.